Hi everybody, welcome back. This is lecture 3 pertaining to chapter 3 in your textbook, which is entitled Explaining Crime. So this chapter, if you have already read, you will have noted that this chapter focuses on criminological theory. I want to start off this lecture by letting you all know that first, criminological theory often can become very complicated. And many of these theories have been developed over years and years of work from different scholars. So one chapter is never going to be enough to be able to explain them in full. Secondly, most people teach criminological theory over an entire semester. So while this is an intro class and it's necessary for us to focus on theory and have you all be exposed to it in some way, don't expect that this lecture is going to cover everything as in-depth as you would get it taking that semester-long theory class. So what I thought we would do today for the purposes of this lecture is that I would just highlight a few of them. I'm not going to go through all that your book goes through. I do have a few issues with the book in terms of some of the theories that they explain. So what I have decided to do is just pick some of the biggest ones that are commonly used with crim theory research and explain them a little bit more to you. So starting off, let's discuss what an actual theory is. So theories, like as you may know theories to be, it's not a concrete explanation. It's not set in stone that this is the reason why something happens. However, when we're talking about crim theory, what this is trying to do is to explain criminal behavior. There's always exceptions to the rules, so none of these are coming from a concrete place. However, these different explanations may be able to contribute to our knowledge base of why people commit crimes. Most of the things that we will be studying in a criminal justice program are after the fact things. After the crime has taken place and they go to prison, or after the crime has taken place, their interactions with police, those sorts of things. However, theory focuses more on the behavioral issues involved with crime and the reasons behind them. So there's a variety of different ways that these theories have been formed, coming from biological or psychological backgrounds. Today what we're going to focus on is mostly the theories coming from the sociological aspects of theory development and research. So theories are attempting to explain criminal behavior, but there's no one specific theory that can explain everything, even though people have certainly tried to do so. And what you also may note is that two theories might do very well in successfully explaining behavior. So these different varieties of knowledge bases are certainly valid in some aspects, but there's not one theory that's going to be an end-all explanation for why people engage in their criminal behavior. So what I thought we would do is sort of start off from a historical perspective and look at things from just a very simplistic point of view. If we don't have a firm knowledge base of what theory is, starting off when people first started theorizing almost 300 years ago, then we're never going to get to the point where we understand modern day theory. And if we don't understand modern day theory, then we're going to have a lot of trouble interpreting criminal justice policies and understanding why people have decided to implement the laws that they have decided to implement. So starting back in that 300+ year approach, we meet up with a man named Cesare Beccaria. And he was an Italian scholar, as his name might suggest to you guys. He came up with the idea of classical theory. And basically, classical theory in a nutshell says that people have free will and they choose to engage in crime. And when they choose to engage in crime, they have to be held responsible for their actions. The other portion of this theory says that even though people know crime may be wrong, I know that I'm breaking the law, I know that I'm creating harm to my victim, I know that I might go to prison for my actions, the benefit of whatever crime I engage in outweighs the potential threat for punishment. So for example, If I'm going to go rob a bank because I'm in desperate need of money, maybe on some obscure chance I think I'm going to get away with it. Even if I don't get away with it, maybe I think I'm going to do well in hiding that money. And if there's some obscure chance that I can get away with this, then the money, the amount of money that I'm able to steal from that bank is certainly going to be worth more to me than the idea that I might go to prison for 20, 30 years. So just the benefit that comes from the actual successful crime is going to outweigh that potential for punishment. Beccaria also argued that in order for us to have a successful body of law, we have to make sure that the laws are reasonable, that the laws are just, and that the laws are going to benefit the majority rather than the individual. So if we say, in order to keep our money safe, we have to have laws against bank robbery. We have to make sure that people aren't bursting into banks every other day trying to steal all of the money out of the vault. So it would make a lot of sense, and it would provide a lot of utility for us to have those types of laws on the books. It would also be of good utility for us to have laws against murder. Yes, it's certainly a moral issue that we have to contend with, but in order to keep people safe, we should have a law against homicide on the books. If there was no law against homicide, if there was no threat of punishment, then what's to stop anybody from walking up the street and shooting you point blank, right? If I know that I have the potential to go to prison for the rest of my life, if I know there's a potential that I might end up on death row, maybe that could end up stopping me from committing a crime. We also believe, based on Beccaria's rationale, that there has to be laws that are built upon what he called the social contract. So we give up some freedom in order to make sure that we are preventing massive chaos. So I give up the right to rob banks. I give up the right to just murder people on the street in order to make sure that nobody else is doing it. If we think about it in a more modern day perspective, in the last year or so, we have heard a lot about the NSA through the Patriot Act being able to spy on our phone calls and read our emails and such. Through the Patriot Act, we are giving up that illusion of privacy through that freedom in order for the NSA to combat terrorism, to prevent that chaos. So you can see it in a more modern day setting, but still the tenets of what Beccaria is arguing in the 1700s are certainly to some extent still holding true today. From Beccaria's classical theory, what we have is the issue of deterrence. And I have already spoken about deterrence before. Deterrence basically is saying if there is a punishment, and I know that that punishment is likely, I know that punishment is not too severe, is it going to be enough to prevent me from engaging in criminal behavior? And there are two types of deterrence that Beccaria had developed and still hold true today. There is special or specific deterrence and general deterrence. So special or specific deterrence would be something that happens to me. I rob the bank, I go to prison for 10, 15, 20 years. When I get out of prison after 10, 15, 20 years, deterrence theory would suggest that I am not going to rob another bank because I don't want to go to prison for another handful of years. So something is happening specifically to me that stops my own personal behavior from continuing on this path of crime. General deterrence would suggest that I see something happen to someone else. I don't want it to happen to me. I see the threat of punishment looming in my own future. I see what has happened to this other person, so I don't want that to happen to me. And the best example we have for this is the death penalty. If I am put to death by the state, then specific deterrence is probably not going to have a likely effect on my future crime, right? I'm not alive to commit any more crimes. However, if I see someone else is going to be put to death for their crimes, maybe I'm not going to engage in homicide because I don't want to face the death penalty, right? So it's a major deterrent for some people to not commit these crimes. However, if I don't think punishment is ever going to happen, again, taking the death penalty. People sit on death row for 15 plus years in some cases. Sometimes they get commuted to life in prison. If I think there is a sliver of a chance that I will not be put to death, would deterrence theory work on me? Well, researchers have looked into this and they have said deterrence theory really does not have an effect on the crime rate. People are always going to commit crime. People are always going to think that I'm the one who's going to get away with it. I'm going to be able to plan the perfect crime and they're not going to find out it was me. So deterrence theory doesn't really have an effect. And interestingly enough, researchers have looked at this death penalty phenomenon, and every time that a convict is put to death, the crime rate actually goes up slightly in retaliation for the state implementing the death penalty on that individual. So we're seeing sometimes that deterrence has no effect, or sometimes has the reverse effect of what researchers and what Beccaria really would suggest to happen. So classical theory is probably going to be the only older theory that we are going to cover for this lecture. Many people use deterrence theory that came from Beccaria's classical theory for years, trying to prove whether or not it had any significant value, towards criminological research. And once everybody kept coming back with these results of it not working, people decided to branch out further. And they decided to say, well, you know what? Crime is often not an isolated occurrence. There are often different reasons why people engage in crime, and many of those reasons come from our social behaviors. How we were raised, the environment in which we came from, our attachments to our parents, our attachments to friends. All of these different social aspects influence the likelihood of us engaging in criminal behavior. None of us are born criminal, none of us are born bad, but we learn how to be criminal. We learn how to engage in these types of behaviors based on these environments in which we come from. So many of these sociological theories come from that environment, come from that background, that say there are different influences to our behavior that all tie together and culminate in whether or not we're going to engage in crime. The first one that we are going to talk about is coming out of the 1920s from a group of sociologists known as the Chicago School, and they were located in Chicago, believe it or not, even though the name kind of gives it away. And they developed a lot of the theories coming out of the Chicago School based on the social conditions they saw in the city of Chicago. So if you know anything from the history of Chicago in the 1920s, we have a few things going on. There's a large amount of organized crime in the city. In the 1920s rather, we're going through the idea of prohibition, so no more alcohol, it's now outlawed. So what people end up doing is creating speakeasies, and they're bootlegging alcohol to combat the laws that say alcohol is forbidden. So you have a large amount of crime taking place in Chicago. So what researchers did was that they looked at the characteristics of the different neighborhoods in the city, and they came up with the idea of concentric zones. And here is the listing of the concentric zones. So if you look at this circle, the smallest circle in the middle, like the bullseye, that would be the business district, for Chicago. That would be where most of business takes place. You don't have a lot of folks who are living there. As you move out through these different zones and you get to this transitional zone, you get to the working class housing, the middle class housing, and the upper class housing, what you're going to have is a lot of crime in these three places. The upper class housing, these folks used to live closer to the city. If you know anything about immigration in the 1920s, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, what you had was a group of immigrants coming over from Europe, and they would live closer to this central business district, right? And they would live in the slum houses, and they would live all packed in with one another. Well, as they started making their way in America, and as they were able to get more money, what they did was they slowly would move outside of the central areas and move closer to the edges of this concentric zone. And what that left, as these people transitioned their way out, it still left the poor. It often left a lot of minorities. It often left a lot of immigrants who have not been able to be successful to get out in these areas. So what you ended up having were concentrated groups of poor people. And when you have that, you have what they call social disorganization. You have a lot of folks who, this is just a temporary place for me. My goal is to get to the 4th and 5th zones. I don't want to live in the inner city anymore. I don't care as much about my surroundings. So when you're in the inner city, social disorganization theory would suggest people are not looking out for one another. Our neighbors are not being too neighborly. There's a lot of trash. There's a lot of filth. Maybe there's broken windows. The houses are in different stages of dilapidation. People just don't care about their surroundings as much as they do in the outer portions of the circle. So if I'm not there being neighborly, if I'm not there looking out for my kids, if I'm not there looking out for my neighbor's kids, if this is just a temporary stop for me, then I'm not going to care as much as if someone broke into my neighbor's house compared to if that happened in the 4th and 5th zones. So you had higher concentrations of crime the closer you got to the center of that city. So the Chicago Project really laid out these firm foundations of the zones, and then people started applying these concentric zones to different cities, and they saw that it held up and that social disorganization theory had some sort of validation based on the inner city issues that were going on there. So this one is something that still works today. Social disorganization is still being tested, and people are still trying to find support for it and finding some levels of it, that your social environment, your neighborhood, is going to have a significant amount of influence on whether or not you become criminal yourself. So here's social disorganization theory. It basically is saying the things that I just said. There's opportunities for delinquent behavior, for delinquent or criminal behavior, because there is not as much supervision. Parents might be absent. It might be a one-parent household. The neighbors are not as neighborly. They're not looking out for one another. There is little hope that if I'm in the inner city, will I ever get out? I've seen people do it successfully. I'm still here. Maybe I'm giving up hope that I will ever leave here. So when the hope leaves, so does the caring sometimes. And I don't really care what happens or goes on around me. This is not the place that I want to be, so I'm not investing as many resources into this area as if I were in other places of the concentric zones. So what this basically has is a breeding ground for delinquency. If there's not a lot of supervision and kids are growing up in this environment and they're seeing that their neighbors and their parents aren't caring, they're seeing that I'm growing up in one family households and it's not the best environment for me to be in. I have absent parents. I don't have very good schooling. It's a breeding ground for delinquency at times, and that's why you see so much violence and things in inner cities. It's just a breeding ground for criminal behavior. But other theorists would say, but even though we see a lot of crime in the inner cities, we see a lot of crime everywhere. It's not just in the inner cities. There's a lot of crime that takes place in the suburbs, and that is in zone 4 and 5. So how do you explain this? So in the next theory that we have, enemy theory, Robert Merton comes up with the idea that sometimes the cultural goals that we expect of ourselves simply are not obtainable. So you have the American dream, right? I have two-parent household, either one or both are working, 2.5 kids, dog, picket fence, yard, right? That's the so-called American dream. Well, what happens when I cannot achieve that American dream? and I'm expected to. That's the goal that I want. The social structure is expecting it of me. But if I cannot achieve that wealth or that goal through regular means, then there is a strain placed upon me. So in the last handful of years, we have gone through a rather significant recession where a lot of people lost their jobs. A lot of companies had hiring freezes where people were unable to get new jobs. So they were finding whatever work that they could. A lot of it was part-time. We didn't have benefits, so on and so forth. So if I'm losing my job, I don't have any income, but I still have all the same bills. I still have a mortgage. I still have to get my kids through school. I still have a car payment, so on and so forth. If I don't have that income to pay all of those bills, that's going to result in some sort of strain on me and my family, or what Robert Merton calls anomie. Later on, scholars will change the name of this from anomie theory to strain theory, but basically the same tenets are going to hold up. There's a gap somewhere between my goals that I want to obtain and the ability for me to be able to obtain them, resulting in this strain. So Merton goes on to talk about, well, if I can't get those goals through normative means, what other ways are there for me to be able to achieve those goals? And he comes up with his list of 5 different ways. So the traditional means are absent from me, so I have to adapt. So do I conform to those traditional means? It might be a struggle, but I'm going to get there. Another job is going to come along. I will be able to pay those bills. Maybe my house goes into foreclosure, but maybe I can try and find a way to salvage it. Even if I have to work 3 part-time jobs and so does my spouse, maybe we can get there and things will get better if we just conform to what we know. Some people choose to innovate. So the job's not coming. I can't get another job where I'm making the same amount of money. So what can I do illegitimately to get that same amount of money and still be able to achieve that normative goal? So that's where you see sometimes drug dealers, you see people who prostitute themselves, you see strippers, things like this. It's not necessarily a normative job. I'm not a banker, but the money is really good. And I can get the money very quickly, and I can afford to buy the things that I want to buy. I can still have that picket fence house. My money is just coming from a different place than it would be if I was the banker. So sometimes you have illegitimate but not necessarily illegal ventures, and then a lot of these things coming from innovation are highly illegal. I'm a drug mule. I'm a drug dealer. Whatever you're doing to pursue that wealth is still going to be illegal. So you're running the risk of getting caught by the police, and you're running the risk of going to prison, but your innovation is paying off because you're getting that goal that you want to get. So sometimes what you have is this idea of ritualism. So this means that you're not necessarily pursuing wealth, you're not doing anything illegal, you can't conform, you can't get that job, so you're not actively trying to get there. However, you are still following the legitimate institutional means. So what this suggests is maybe the picket house is not for me, but at least I can pay my rent, at least I can get the bare essentials for me, and that's enough. I don't have to go above and beyond. I don't have to be driving a Mercedes, but at least my car runs. That's enough for me. I don't have to continue on going above and beyond what it is in my life that people suggest that I need. Then you have retreatism. So I can't achieve the goals that I want. Maybe those goals aren't even important to me. I don't need to have a house. I don't need to have this kind of job. I'm okay just sort of backing off and just living my life. So sometimes you see this with the homeless who choose to be homeless. Sometimes you see this with people who go live in the woods in a small cabin and they live off the land. I'm not concerned. You see these shows all the time, like on A&E with the Alaskan Bush people, or you see on the History Channel with mountain men. I'm going back to a simpler time with simpler roots. I don't need to be in the middle of a city. I don't need to live in the suburbs. I'm just living off the land, and I'm sort of dropping off what it means to be part of this American institution. Last category of rebellion. So basically what this is saying is I am rejecting both the normative goal of that picket fence life, and I'm rejecting the institutional ways to get there. So I'm rejecting the regular job. I'm rejecting the climb up the corporate ladder. And I'm substituting my own personal goals and my own personal means of getting there. So maybe my means of getting there still could be illegal, but I'm doing what is important to me to get to the goal that I am looking to get to. So this one is more of an individual basis and doesn't sort of fit in with the other four with that normative goal, if you will. Okay, so here is just a little chart of what the 5 are. The cultural goals, whether or not the individual subscribes to them, and then the institutional means of getting there. So the first one, conformity, the plus marks mean that there is acceptance of the cultural goals, and the minus marks mean that there is rejection of either the goals or the means. So conformity has acceptance of both, so that it sort of is the place marker, and then we can adapt from there based on the individual and based on the different things that Merton is suggesting in enemy theory and later strain theory. All right, so switching gears, we'll now move towards learning theory. And Sutherland was really the first individual to come up with the idea of learning theory. And there are different branches of learning theory that people have developed since Sutherland first created it in the early 1930s. But basically, Sutherland's theory says that, like any other behavior, we have to learn to be criminal. It's just not embedded in us. We have to learn how to be criminal. And if we're trying to learn how to be criminal, we probably should learn how to be good criminals, right? If I don't want to get caught, I should probably figure out what it is that I'm doing before I wake up one day and say, hey, it's a great day to go steal someone's car, right? I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know how to get into the car. I don't know how to hotwire it. I don't even know if this particular car can be hotwired. I better figure out what it is that I'm doing. So like all behavior, crime is learned. And the way that we learn crime is through what Sutherland said was his 7th and most important tenet of the theory, differential association. How do I learn how to be criminal? Well, I learned to be criminal by spending time with other criminals who are going to be able to show me how to successfully steal this car, or how to successfully rob a bank, or how to successfully cook meth. I need an example to be able to go out and do it on my own. If I have pro-criminal definitions, I'm going to be more likely to engage in criminal behavior. If I have anti-criminal definitions, it doesn't matter who I'm hanging out with, I'm not going to engage in crime. So it certainly has been modified, as I said, but this theory in particular, the learning theories, have had the most success in explaining why crime is caused and what influences people to engage in criminal behavior. So this is one of the things that I did not necessarily like from your textbook. When we talk about learning theories, most criminologists focus on Ronald Akers' social learning theory. Ronald Akers developed this based on Sutherland's 7th tenet of his differential association theory, and basically says that social learning theory, it can explain criminal behavior based on these 4 elements of the theory. Differential association, differential reinforcement, definitions favorable or unfavorable to criminal behavior, and finally, modeling or imitation. Some of these are very similar to what Sutherland said, but Akers really goes forward with them and explains them in a more concrete way and allows him to have success testing this theory through a variety of different criminal behaviors. Ronald Akers basically says that his theory can explain any type of criminal behavior, and he has tested it on basically every type there is with a large amount of success. So he might be just right. So his four elements of the theory, the first is differential association, like Sutherland's saying. If I want to be criminal, then you have to hang out with other criminals. So my peer associations are going to have a large influence on my behaviors. Who do I hang out with the most? Is it my normative friends or is it my delinquent friends? Do I hang out with them for a long amount of time? And do I put them first in my friendships? Do they mean the most to me? What I can get from them, does that help out the situation? So who I hang out with is first and foremost the most important part of social learning theory. Differential reinforcement has a lot to do with it too. So you have both positive and negative reinforcement. So let's say I am going to try pot for the very first time, and I'm hanging out with a lot of my pot smoking friends. And I decide that I'm going to smoke, and on my first time smoking, I have a bad experience. I don't like it. I don't want to do it anymore. That's the end of my pot smoking days. So this would be an example of negative reinforcement. I did not enjoy the experience. I don't want to do it again. It did not go well. It's not necessarily a punishment, but it was a negative experience. So what happens if I smoke that same pot and I really like it, I enjoy the experience, I want to do it again real soon? That would be a positive type of reinforcement that goes along with that particular behavior. What if I start smoking pot and there's a cop who watches me do it? Then you could result in punishment, and it could potentially be another type of negative reinforcement. So you see how these things would vary in terms of the same behavior based on the situations and the experiences that are taking place. Okay, so I have criminal friends. Everything went well the first time we did it, so I've been positively reinforced. Now we have to look at the next two things. So we have definitions favorable or unfavorable to committing crime. And basically this is just saying which of the two are stronger. Even though I know it might be illegal to engage in this behavior, and I know that someone might get hurt, does that really matter to me? Am I okay with being criminal and breaking the law because I know the outcome of that behavior is going to result in something that was better than not doing it at all? So which one sort of trumps the other? Your pro-criminal mentality or your anti-criminal ideals? Which one comes out on top? And finally, we have imitation and modeling. So basically, this is the one where after you have learned the behavior, you're going to do it. So going back to my car theft example, if I watch my partner do it and he steals the first 3 cars and he's teaching me how to do it, on the 4th car, maybe I feel like I know enough now that I can go ahead and do it. And I'm modeling the behavior. I'm imitating what he did to successfully steal the car. So imitation modeling is actually the crime after you have learned to do it. So based on these 4 things, Ronald Akers suggests that you learn how to do crime just like anything else. When you're little and you learn how to tie your shoes, somebody normally ties them for you first and shows you how to engage in the behavior, and then you try to imitate and model that person by tying your own shoes. So you can learn any type of behavior, whether it's criminal or not. The same processes go into it. It just has a different outcome in the type of behavior that you engage in. So far we have talked about reasons why people commit crime. And with social control theory, Travis Hershey asked the question, well, why do people not commit crime? Because tons of people don't commit crime on a regular basis. They live their normative lives and they never commit crime. Well, Travis Hershey's theory of social control suggests that those individuals who do not commit crime have strong social bonds. And because I am attached to others and I have all of these other things going on, I don't want to give that up. And by giving that up to commit crime, I end up having the potential of losing these things. So I'm attached to others. I have strong relationships with my friends. My parents are in my life. This is a theory that first was tested on juveniles. So is the attachment to parents very strong? Are they there? Do they know what's going on in my life? Am I committed to a higher goal? If I'm in high school Am I studying at school? Am I making sure I have good grades? If my goal is to go to college, am I doing everything I can do to get into that college? If I am not committed to something larger than myself, what is there to stop me from engaging in crime? I'm not going to go rob a liquor store and potentially give up the ability to go to college because I now have a criminal record. So the commitment sometimes has to be stronger than the desire to engage in crime. Involvement as well. If I'm too busy doing other things, if I'm too busy trying to get into that college, and after school I'm involved in a variety of extracurricular activities, I have no time to be criminal because I'm so involved in all of these other things. And then finally, Hershey suggests that if you believe that it's immoral to be criminal, if you believe it's wrong to break the law, then you're probably not going to do it to jeopardize all of these other things. So because I am strongly bonded to commitments and goals and to people, I'm not going to engage in criminal behavior. So all of our other theories suggested why people do commit crime, and this one suggests why people do not commit crime. However, if I still commit the crime, now we can explain it through the idea of labeling theory. So labeling theory is a little bit different, and this theory suggests that, all right, a crime has already taken place. That part we cannot stop, but how are we going to face this individual in the future? Labeling theory suggests that you define people as criminal, and that definition, that label, is going to have a strong influence on whether or not I commit crime in the future. So this idea of the self-fulfilling prophecy. You can have formal or informal labels. If I commit a crime and the criminal justice system finds out about it, I'm arrested and convicted, I have been labeled a criminal through that formal process of adjudication against me. However, there is the idea of informal labeling theory. So what happens if the criminal justice system never finds out about my crime, but my friends or my family do? Maybe I'm informally going to be labeled as an outcast based on my behavior. So my friends and family do it, or the criminal justice system does it. It has a similar effect. If you call me criminal, what is to stop me from being criminal in the future? If that's the only thing you can see me as, and you keep me outcasted from you, I might as well do what it is that you claim that I am. So the idea of labeling someone as criminal keeps them outcast from the rest of society, and sometimes can result in people living up to the label that is placed upon them. Labeling theory was then sort of manifested into the idea of reintegrative shaming. Reintegrative shaming theory says that yes, you have still committed the crime, but you have served your punishment, you have been incarcerated, and now you have a new start on the outside. And if we as a community do not do anything to bring you back into the fold and keep you outcast, then you're going to continue to be a criminal. So if you look here on the right, this picture of this woman with a sandwich board saying, "I am a thief." Sometimes businesses, Walmart in particular, will do this if they find someone shoplifting. We might not press formal charges, but in exchange for us not pressing formal charges, you have to go in front of the store and sort of shame or humiliate yourself. So this is a portion of reintegrative shaming. The offender is shamed, that's the punishment, and now we're going to bring you back into society. You have served your time, you have engaged in the punishment that we wanted to place upon you. We'll bring you back in, and all is well. You are forgiven. However, disintegrative shaming says you are not forgiven. Once a thief, always a thief. We're never going to let you back in the store, and we're going to keep you outcast. So if people are not properly reintegrated, then the likelihood they will keep engaging in crime goes up. If you do not forgive them, the theory suggests that they will live up to the ideals that you place upon them and live up to what the label essentially is. So it still has elements of labeling theory in there, but the idea of forgiveness and reintegration is a lot stronger in this theory than it is in its predecessor. All right. So that's really the main ones that I wanted to go over. As I said at the beginning of the lecture, this was going to be a very brief overview, and not everything in this chapter can explain criminal behavior. This is not all of the theories that are out there. The ones that I have given you are pretty much the main ones that people study a lot and have had success with, but there's a variety of other things that are being used to explain criminal behavior. You would learn all of these in a semester-long class, and even then you would not get as in-depth as people really need to. So like I said, Ronald Akers did this for his entire career. He built one career on one theory, and that's all he did was test it over and over and over again to try and make sure that he was correct in what it is that he was theorizing. So one semester and one lecture are certainly not enough. But I certainly needed to make sure that you guys were going to be exposed to this for future classes, so you certainly know what types of theories are out there to explain criminal behavior. So with this lecture ending, I would like to remind you guys that there's only one more. Chapter 4, the Rule of Law, will be the next lecture, and it is the last lecture before your first quiz. So make sure that you're preparing and that you're keeping up with the readings before that quiz happens so that you have enough time to take it and be able to do well on it. The other reminder is that your first writing assignment is coinciding with Chapter 4. Make sure that you have that into me on time and that you have enough information in that writing assignment from the chapter or from the lecture that you can do well enough on it as well. So that's all I have for you guys today. I will see you in the next lecture with the Rule of Law. And if you don't have any other questions, I'll see you in the next lecture. And if you do, I will be talking with you soon. Thanks, guys, and have a great day. Bye.